Hey YouTube, welcome back. I've been playing one of the most busted builds that I've ever played. It was recommended to me by someone in Twitch chat. We watched some YouTube videos, we did some research, and we fell in love with a skill that I've already fallen in love with. It's Healing Hands. This build must be one of the most beautiful builds that I've played in all of last Epoch. If it's not the most beautiful build, it's top 3. I don't know how it gets any more beautiful than this. This build auto targets with piercing, beautiful, shiny gold projectiles all enemies on the screen simultaneously. It's got good defense. It's got busted defense. It has good damage. It has a dream come true playstyle, and it's buttery smooth to play. I'm so happy to recommend this build to you. For those of you out there who are always in the YouTube comments saying, can this build get to 2,000 corruption? I'll have you know that this build comes from a YouTube person, Eva Markova. They've been posting a handful of these videos on the YouTube side. We're talking about this Divine Bolt Sentinel, this Paladin build here, and they've been pushing like 2,000 corruption. They are gearing their character very defensively to push their character to the absolute limits, and that's awesome. So we took a look at that video, absolutely fell in love, followed their videos as a outline for our character here, learned the ins and outs of the character, and we're going to present all that information for you here. Our build is going to be slightly different because I do not prioritize having 200,000 ward because our defense is already absolutely busted. For what it's worth, my character here is generating about 5,000 ward every time that I right click, and of course we scale cast speed as well. So our character is level 100. Our character is about 900 corruption or so. I'm not intentionally pushing corruption because I find that boring, but I do find this character fun. So I'm just kind of pushing corruption because it's been such a joy to play this character here. So I want to outline a couple things first about this character before we dive into talking about the skills, the gear, the masteries, the minutia of the build, and how you might go about gearing this character similar or different than me or even other YouTubers. So let's talk about like what's ethical about this build, what's unethical about this build. So I actually think that the damage output of this build is quite ethical. I've played lots of builds that are insane. I've seen lots of builds that are insane. I think that this is ethical build. My gear in the clips and my gear for the people that you watch on YouTube, like they have good gear and I have good gear. My gear could even be quite a bit better, but I feel like it's going to take a long time to get to that point, and I'm kind of getting bored. So I'd like to move on to another build. I think my damage is very appropriate for a high-end, top-tier character playing a good skills that has access to more multipliers, that has lots of good gear with like multiple LP on all of my gear slots. This is the kind of damage that a character should be doing. And I'm not saying at all that this character should be nerfed in terms of in terms of offense. What is unethical about this build? Well, we're playing Healing Hands. We generate 5,000 ward on right click, and we only have about 100 ward retention because we have not intentionally built any of it. That's insane. We know that in patch 1.1, the developers will change this in some way. We don't know exactly what the ward numbers will look like, but we know what their intent is. So something along those lines. On the other hand, something that I like to address more specifically is the absolutely insane playstyle of this build. So this is something that kind of surprises me that it's in the game because it's not, I guess you could nerf it, but it's not like it's dealing too much damage or it's not dealing enough damage or it's too tanky. It's the playstyle. And if you play with a controller or a gamepad, you're going to love this. If you're a lazy Twitch streamer like me, you're going to love this. If you want a low APM build, holy moly, you're going to love this. You auto-target enemies on the entire screen, sometimes off-screening them, with a piercing projectile in all directions around your character at all points in time, and it does not matter where your mouse is. It's the laziest build, and I absolutely love it. It's the kind of build that's so lazy that when someone says, I want to play Righteous Fire and I want the walking simulator, like, I wish you didn't want Righteous Fire because this is so much better and so much lazier than any of those builds. It's so buttery smooth in terms of playstyle. That's the part about this build, honestly, that strikes me as the most unethical. Yeah, it's got a billion ward, whatever, they're going to nerf that. But like, are they also going to nerf hitting every enemy on the screen at the same time? Because they did with Ballista, but what about this one? We'll see. Something that you might care about is leveling this character. Lots of people ask about what makes this build tick. How do I play this character? And that would be, well, in order to shoot divine bolts, you need to be healing yourself. Of course, your health needs to be less than like maximum 100%. So the most common way to do that is with something like this, which is the percent current health loss per second, percent health gain is ward per second. So this is the Healing Hands mod, or the Low Life mod, or the Exsanguinous mod, whatever you want to call this mod in your vernacular. So it also enables the ward generation of Healing Hands, which is probably the thing you want to be doing, but it also allows the Divine Bolt thing to work, because if you're not healing yourself, you won't shoot any Divine Bolts. Curiously enough, you can also enable the Divine Bolt portion of the build without enabling the ward generation busted OP part of the build by playing with a Twisted Heart of Buceros instead. You could also do both, but you can technically enable this without the Low Life mod with a Twisted Heart. So that's a fun thing to note. In terms of leveling this build, I have not leveled this particular build, but I have leveled other Healing Hands builds. And Healing Hands is a skill that can be procced off of both Smite and a melee attack. You could cast it yourself, you could channel it yourself. Honestly, what you should do for leveling this character is find one of those playstyles that works well, and then build Healing Effect. Because the fact that it scales flat damage to its spell or to its attack based off of Healing Effect is absurd. So just get as much Healing Effect as you can, whatever unique items you're using, or whatever idols, or whatever twink gear, or stuff you find on the ground. Make sure you're looking for as much Healing Effect as possible, and you will worry about the details later on, because you will have a good experience with Healing Hands when you're building a bunch of Healing Effect early and often on your Healing Effect character. So that's a good thing to know about. We're going to jump into the skills first, and I have lots of little details. You can always use the YouTube chapters to browse around everything that we'll be talking about. Those will be listed in the comment section of this video here. But first up, we'll talk about the skills, we'll talk about mastery, and then the gear, and then some other details at the end of this video. For Healing Hands first, we have a very normal looking skill tree. You'll see that I have +4 to Healing Hands. I think you only need +2 to Healing Hands, which puts you at a tier 5 affix on your helmet, so not needing an exalted affix on your helmet. A couple of things to talk about. We have these 2 nodes up here. These are defensive nodes. They technically give you some damage sometimes. It's relevant, but if you only had 22 on Healing Hands instead of 24 from something like this, that gives you plus levels to Healing Hands in your helmet slot. What you'd use those on is maxing out this node down here, the Urgent Healing node. So I would not bother with these 2 nodes if you don't have +4 to your Healing Hands in your helmet. Other things, other other choices that we have here. Homeward makes it so that wherever our mouse is, we're always casting on ourselves, which means we're always generating ward on our own character. We are not taking the minus cast speed here. We would like to have as much cast speed as possible. Technically, this would give you a nice more damage multiplier, but the cast speed's important because it helps scale up the Immolator's Ablation belt that we're using. It also gives us better ward generation. It also helps us to stack up our sources of shred, our armor shred, our fire shred, things like that. I think it's a good choice not to have this, because cast speed, along with attunement, along with healing effect, those are all things that scale both offense and defense at the same time. Whereas a more multiplier here only scales damage, it doesn't also scale our defense. I think the defense of the build is just it's so buttery smooth. So this point down here, I mentioned this previously. This point is one of the things that's kind of absurd when it comes to Healing Hands. It's not something that's immediately obvious if you haven't played this skill before. It is plus 140 flat healing, and that healing gets scaled with healing effect and then turned into ward. So when I right click, I'm at 500 ward here, and I go to about 5,000 ward, so generate about 4,500 ward or so. This node, I can generate more than that. You want to see? No. Because I forgot to turn on my 4 sigils and I popped my holy aura. Of course, we have about 1,400 healing effect there. So with 1,400-ish healing effect, this node times 1,400 effect gives us about 2,100 ward. So this node accounts for about half of how much ward I generate per right click. So if you're trimming points and you only have +2 to Healing Hands, you definitely want 4 in this. I would definitely trim these 2 here. This is absurd. So in Healing Hands, there's 2 skills. There's 2 nodes that appear to me to be very important. One is this node here, Bane of Evil. This is the reason that we're scaling healing effect and everything. And the other node is this. It's a little bit misunderstood, underappreciated. So we'll just read it first. Healing Hands deals more damage based on the combined levels of your specialized buff skills. The sneaky thing about this, well, first of all, Healing Hands is a buff, Holy Aura is a buff, Sigils is a buff, so we use all our buff skills. But also, Javelin, if you take the node on the right side, it's battle standard, Javelin gains the buff tag. And you can see that by me hovering over this node in the middle here. So it's a buff, and it gives me 20% more damage. Realistically, I already have 20, 40, 60, 64 levels. So this is a 64% more damage multiplier here. So it moves the 64% more damage multiplier to be an 84% more damage multiplier. So for me, the thing that I'm doing with Javelin here represents about 12.2% more damage to my build, which is a nice chunk of more damage, but I'm actually using Lunge instead, because Lunge to me feels way better. So you can use Javelin as a movement skill if you'd like to. I greatly prefer using Lunge as my movement skill. What does that mean that I sacrifice? Basically nothing. It means that I sacrifice the percent increased damage per attunement here. I've got about 90 attunement on my character here. So this would give me 180% increased damage. And for me, getting a bonus 180% increased damage is not worth the quality of life sacrifice. So I use Lunge, but I spec Javelin because of this node here, Cleric's Wrath. The rest of how you spec Javelin doesn't matter, especially if you use it like me, which is not using it. Next up is Holy Aura. We are a fire damage, fire penetration, cast speed, fiend with a little bit of crit chance, a little bit of crit multi. We have all 4 points in the top left into increased healing effect. Remember, this is doubled while Holy Aura is active. So we'd like to get cooldown recovery speed if possible, because not only does cooldown recovery speed scale Holy Aura's uptime, but it also gives us more volatile reversals. One pit trap for you to avoid is, first of all, if you're like leveling this character brand new, you can spec into this. As you don't need your resistance, you can spec out of this, unless you're doing something with Frostbite Shackles. One thing to avoid is this. This node will cleanse ailments on you. If you are doing what I'm doing and using an Immolator's Ablation, you would like to not cleanse ailments off of yourself. So I would not use this node. For reference, as I play this character, I am numlocking my Holy Aura. Of course, I don't have numlock on my computer, so what that means for me is my Holy Aura is my pinky holding down the Q button on my keyboard for 10 hours at a time. Going on to Volatile Reversal, I've got a separate video talking about Volatile Reversal. It's one of the strongest skills in the game because it simply stacks. Everything about this skill stacks. If you see something that looks good, consider having 2 of it or even 4 of it if you're getting some bonus cooldown by killing things with Volatile Reversal, like in Arena, for example. If I could somehow retool this character perfectly, I would consider having plus levels to Volatile Reversal on my helmet, perhaps instead of Attunement here, because if I really wanted to juice up this character as much as possible, I would even put 2 points into Ancient Reversal here. So that would send me further back in time, which would let me stack or have a better chance of stacking things like the attack speed, the cast speed, the movement speed during something like Arena, if I were trying to push as high in the arena as possible, for example. So you can also put a flex point into time sat. But the most important stuff here is the percent increased damage taken, the first node here, second node here, because our mana is basically perfect. We don't care about that. And then all the utility and speed on these nodes there. In Sigils of Hope is something that you definitely do not need to bother with during a map. But during a boss, you should bother with it because it's percent increased damage, it gives you healing effect, and you'd like to have as much damage as possible during a boss fight. So, most important point here is Last Wish, chance to summon a sigil on kill. This just means you don't need to cast them while you are walking around. But for the rest of this, we have a little bit extra flat damage on our character here. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 times 12, right? 12, another 12 flat damage for this thing here. And then some duration, +1 maximum, and some increased healing per active. So, one nice thing about this spell character is that we're scaling a bunch of cast speed, so we can just like do, and it's very, very easy to summon all 4 of them without feeling like I need to stand there and cast my sigils over and over like you might feel with a melee character, because a melee character probably doesn't have the cast speed to make the sigils self-casting feel good. Let's jump over to the mastery real quick. This is a character that generates an obscene amount of ward, so we are not taking any not taking any vitality nodes. We just don't care about those. We're taking things like res, less damage taken, some extra utility from Valiant Charge to like use our skills faster, and just a couple points into the increased damage here because why not? We got 2 extra points that we need to put somewhere. You could flex these around if your res situation is different than mine, but I like having strength because I like having armor. In the Void Knight skill tree, I'm only putting 5 points to pick up Volatile Reversal. If you want to spec slightly differently or more aggressively, you put 5 more points into this and pick up this Void Corruption node. That would net you 11 crit multi for your character. No points in Forge Guard. If you wanted to min-max your defenses, you would consider putting a point into block and a point into block in the base mastery tree for Sentinel as well. But that is something cute that you can opt into that I did not opt into. For our Paladin skill tree, you'll see that we're basically clicking on everything that has the word healing effect in it. So we have some healing effect here, some healing effect here, some healing effect here, some healing effect here. This thing procs, we never die. So we're not taking this, but we are taking the 1-pointer in the healing effect from this thing here, along with some movement speed, some healing effect, some healing effect, some healing effect, and some healing effects. I guess this is a legally distinct healing effect. It just gives you % increased damage. Things to note here is you could flex out of Valor. This is only 50% increased healing effectiveness. So you could flex these points out because the health is kind of wasted, but the healing effect is still good. You could flex these 10 points elsewhere if you wanted to go crit avoid or armor or those block nodes or even the extra crit multi up here. Points that we care about the most are these, the Divine Bolt points. So you'll note that when we have one enemy next to us, if we right click, we shoot 6 projectiles at it. Healing Hand skill tree says Divine Bolt is affected by specific passes from the Paladin skill tree, and if you take this node, then Divine Bolt from all sources scale with the nodes on this tree. So we are not using a melee attack, so this first node obviously does nothing for us, but we are very interested in the insane quality of life that comes from the Shared Divinity node. This node shoots 5 extra projectiles, so we have 6 projectiles going out, off-screening in all directions, auto-targeting all the time. So remember, Healing Hand shoots 5, and this is 1. So it could shoot 4 more of those for a total of 5 times 6 is 30 projectiles, shooting off, scaling with cast speed in all directions at all points in time, which is pretty insane if you ask me. So that about does it for our things, for our skills and for our mastery. Let's talk about the gearing options because there's quite a bit of things you need to know about. What is the simplest thing to say when it comes to gear? Well, your offense and your defense scale with 3 things: cast speed, healing effect, and attunement. So what you should build on your character is cast speed, healing effect, and you guessed it, attunement. Rounding out the rest of the character are things like crit avoid, if you opt into crit avoid. If you opt into something like Fiery Dragon Shoes, where you have this 85% reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes, and that kind of sort of caps your crit avoid, because taking 15% increased damage, it's no big deal. So you could also get like another 15% reduced bonus damage taken from crits on a belt or on a glove, for example. So that could be an option for you to cap this out. Even your body armor is a nice slot for fitting in the rest of that 15% if you really want to min-max your defense in terms of crit avoidance. Other things you care about, we have a ton of flat damage in our build, and one of the rewards for having tons and tons of flat damage is that you get to use one of the most meta broken items in the game. Mad Alchemist Ladle gives us 48% more damage. We don't care about the cast speed per intelligence. We're not really building intelligence. We don't care about the mana gain. Don't really care about that. Mad Alchemist Ladle is an item that has 48% more damage written on it. It's a wand, so it has that -3 mana cost, and it's relatively easy to get this thing with 2 or 3 LP on it. So getting fire damage and cast speed, something like this is fine. I think my best one would be tier 7 cast speed, tier 5 crit multi. I think we get enough % increased damage, but this thing is fine as well. And then, of course, the new affix introduced in 1.0 is fire penetration. Fire penetration is good. It'd be nice to have chill in my build. I actually don't have any chill in my build. So if you're looking for random suffixes to fill in on your wand, chill would be a nice one because remember, it's an action speed slow. It slows both movement speed and attack and cast speed. For our helmet, you're looking for at least +2 to healing hands. There's lots of good, interesting options when it comes to helmet. I'm using this one because I played a different healing hands character and I already had this. But it brings up an interesting question about where do you get crit from? So real quick, ignore that this item looks interesting. It's actually a boring item. We'll get there in a moment. This thing has a +6 spell critical strike chance implicit. So your base crit is 5, +6 is 11. And the question is, how do you get enough crit to get your character up to, 75 or 85 or maybe even 95% critical strike chance, where you really want to be? You don't got to max out your crit, but getting it up to at least 75, 85, that's where you want. You need some kind of flat crit coming from the offhand. If you used a shield, like an absolute maniac, wanting even more defense on this character, then you would want to use different sources of flat critical strike chance. You could use something like a Dragwrath Claw, for example, that has a +4 implicit, but it doesn't have minus mana cost. So maybe you would flex a different point in Healing Hands to the minus mana cost to make up for that. So maybe you trim 2 points here and you grab this for Dragonwrath Claw instead. That could be another option for you. The other sources of crit that you should know about are Logi's Hunger. Logi's Hunger has +3 fire spell or fire critical strike chance. Ever since the update for Healing Hands where they added the fire tag in, this does work with giving you flat critical strike chance. It's another good source if you're really trying to cap out your crit and make use of crit multi. And the other one, of course, is the classic Prismatic Gaze. Prismatic Gaze strikes me as something that's really tedious to farm with 2 or 3 LP, because not only do you want one with 2 LP, or at least 1 LP, you also want it to have that 4 critical strike chance instead of the 2 critical strike chance, the third to bottom line of text there. When you would have a unique item, like you don't only want the unique item, you also want it to be well rolled. The more things that you're looking to be well rolled, the more tedious it is to farm one of those. So a Peak of the Mountain is very easy to get with 2 LP, even with 3 LP. It's quite straightforward. And then it rolls between 240 and 290 increased critical strike chance, but that's fine. Other items that we'll talk about in the same vein, so slightly more difficult to get than a Peak of Mountain, is this Hand of Judgment. So Hand of Judgment has 2 affixes that we care about here. It has the Attunement, which goes from 4 to 16, and also has Fire Penetration, going from 8 to 24 Fire Penetration. So both of those are kind of wide ranges. You want, in terms of getting good damage, something like this that has a good roll on Attunement, good roll on Fire Penetration, and also has 2 or maybe 3 LP. You'd like to have the Fortify, the crit reduction suffix, if you could get it. You'd like to have the Armor Shred suffix, if you could get it. And of course, tier 7 cast speed is just chef's kiss for an item like this, for a build like this. And again, we said that the experimental modifier for draining health is an important thing, not only to generate ward, but also to literally play the build, because it makes the Divine Bolt happen. Coming in at the worst item to farm is Scales of Eterra. This has caused lots and lots of questions from Twitch chat, but it's really just there to cause you to ask questions to me when you're watching this build. So why are we using Scales of Eterra? Scales of Eterra, the dirty secret about this item, I'm so sorry, McFluffin, is that this item is bad. If you see someone using a Scales of Eterra, they're doing one of 2 things with it. One, they are completely ignoring the last 2 lines of text. So I'm a fire build, and mine has cold infusion and lightning infusion, which means it's perfect for me because I don't need to worry about that text. The other use case for people using Scales of Eterra is abusing the crap out of it and getting a very long duration spell or a skill, something like Locust Swarm when you're playing a Swarm Blade Druid, and like snapshotting the huge more damage multiplier and having it apply for the next minute or 2 minutes. You basically only have those 2 use cases. I don't know of an ethical build that makes use of all of the text on Scales of Eterra, and I would be surprised if there is one. If you have one, show me. I would genuinely love to see it. So what are we using Scales of Eterra for? Well, we're a cast speed build, and this item is a unique that has cast speed on it, which means ideally, with LP, you'd like to put more cast speed on it. So the reason this is so tedious to farm is 1, it's kind of rare. 2, you want the 6 implicit, and you can't craft it, so it has to drop naturally with a 6 implicit. It also needs to have the fire and... it needs to have the cold lightning infusion on it, so it should not have the fire infusion on it. And it needs to have 1 LP, or maybe even 2 LP. But then once it has LP, you also need to slam it and actually hit the tier 7 cast speed, unlike me, because I am a very unlucky person who did not hit the tier 7 cast speed the 2 times that I tried, because I had 2 shots at it, and I'm very unlucky. So, if you don't have the Scales of Eterra, which I don't expect you to, literally just use an item that looks like this. You should have a 6 implicit as the spell critical strike chance, as much cast speed as possible, and then do whatever you want with the rest of it. Ideally, something like spell critical strike chance would be nice. The second prefix modifier there. Your suffixes could be cold res in case you're looking to do something with frostbite shackles, or it could be any old other resistance that you want to add there. So honestly, my Scales of Eterra is not particularly good because it doesn't have cast speed. It doesn't have that sweet double cast speed on it. But it does have Attunement, which is nice because Attunement is one of our offensive and defensive stats because it gives a healing effect. It's good enough, but it's really just there to make you ask questions about why on earth we're using this item. Other things we can talk about here, our belt is notably not a unique item. Technically, you could use a unique item with the addition of the fire tag to Holy Aura, to healing hands. You could even use something like this, a Dark Shroud of Cinders. So it has some flat damage on it, which you're not really lacking. You probably have about 300 flat damage, but this also gives you fire spell cast speed. So if you're trying to juice up your damage as much as possible, you'd like to have another 17 cast speed off of something like this item here. Instead, I would recommend using the new Sentinel Body Armor from 1.0 that has 700 flat armor on it. Definitely the best one. 700 flat armor is insane. You'd like to have things like Attunement. You'd like to have things like Armor Shred Effect. 100% increased Armor Shred Effect. Just imagine that you're applying twice as many Armor Shred stacks as you actually are. Getting something like 100 or 50 with 100% increased effect is what I shoot for in a build like this. Your suffixes can be Fortify, so that reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes, or things like percent increased armor, flat armor, some physical res to round out whatever resistances you need for your build. Something along those lines is what your belt ought to look like. While I'm farming this character here, I spent a lot of time doing Soulfire Bastion, because there's items there that you're interested in using. The rings have percent damage, ward retention, cast speed, which, weird, we're really looking for as much cast speed as possible, and even just a 1 LP that has tier 6 or tier 7 healing effect on it is exactly the kind of thing you're looking for. If you have insane RNG, you could look for like healing effect plus Attunement, because Attunement, again, is one of those offensive and defensive scalers. For our belt, we get to use Immolator's Ablation. Again, this only works because we're using a fire skill, because the fire tag was introduced to healing hands. This thing, it has a funny little story that goes along with it. I was under the impression that this thing stacked up to 40 flat damage, but it actually stacks up to 40 stacks of Ignite, which means that if you can get 40 stacks of Ignite on yourself at the max roll, you're generating 240 flat damage, which is not my impression of how this belt worked. Apparently other people knew this for a long time. I, who asked a developer once and was told that it worked the other way, did not understand how this belt worked. I have lots to say about that. I feel like this belt should probably be nerfed now that I understand exactly what it's doing. But for our build, the maximum number of ignites that I've generated on myself has been about 16. On average, I think generating 10 is very, very reasonable. But this gives you a handful of flat damage, and you'd like to have as much flat damage as possible. We already have 1,400 healing effect. It was 140 times 2 is 280. So our healing effectiveness is giving us 280. And then we also have sigils, we have the wand implicit, we have like a tiny bit of like flat damage coming in from other sources, but you know, we have about 300 flat damage. Going from 300 flat damage to 360 flat damage, it's notable, but like, do you really need it to go up to 40 EHG? Does it really need to go that high? The more interesting thing that goes on with this belt is not only does it give it flat, but it also gives us Frenzy. So Frenzy is cast speed, and cast speed is one of those 3 things that gives us both offense and defense at the same time. Important to note about this belt, you can get affixes on your gear that say fire damage and ignite duration. It would seem at first glance that ignite duration would scale the duration of the ignites on your own character. It doesn't. The percent increased fire damage hybrid modifier that gives you ignite duration, it's a good modifier because it gives you percent increased damage. It is not also dipping with Immolator's Ablation, scaling the duration of the ignites on your own character. It doesn't do that. Is it intended to? I don't know. So we talk about fiery dragon shoes. There's a slew of interesting boots that you can use. I ended up choosing this one because it has that reduced bonus damage taken from crits, and it allows you to not worry about critical strike avoidance or critical strike avoidance on something like this. One of the biggest benefits that I feel this offers is, first of all, it gives you a different blessing, so you can go for like an all-res blessing if you'd like to from the Reign of Dragons. But for me, it meant that if I upgrade to a second Ashes of Mortality ring, it eases the gear constraints that I have. I don't need crit avoidance as a suffix on this ring. I could simply use a 1 LP ring with healing effect, and I don't need to make up the lack of critical strike avoidance elsewhere. So that's one of these benefits of using the reduced bonus damage taken from crits. The last piece of gear that we're going to talk about here is Soulfire, and I've got right under it another interesting option. Soulfire has a pretty low LP level, which means you can get it with 2, 3, or sometimes even 4 LP if you're very lucky. It gives us more spell damage, Awesome. It also gives us increased armor while ignited, so it works out quite well with igniting ourselves off of Immolator's Oblation here. So it's got 100% increased armor. It's got more damage on it. It has Ignite, which is another thing that we can use to scale up our Mad Alchemist Ladle. And it has the more damage on it. So things like tier 7 cast speed and tier 5 healing effect, or tier 7 healing effect and tier 5 cast speed, one of those things. And then for suffixes, you could get frailty on this if you don't already have it on your amulets. Things like cold res would be relevant if you end up going the Frostbite Shackles route. But Frostbite Shackles for me represents juicing up the defense of a build that already has S tier defense. And like I said at the very beginning of this video, I feel as though the damage output of this build is fair. It is obviously good, but I feel as though, like, which one's stronger, which one's weaker. I feel like the offenses are a little bit weaker, and the defenses are totally insane. So I would prefer to go an offensive route with the gloves instead of worrying about having 200,000 ward, because I'm never going to push to 5,000 corruption, so I don't need 5,000 ward. To fit 500,000. You know what I'm trying to say. All right, let's go to idols next. For the idols, you have a very easy gearing experience. The most important thing is the prefix modifier. You'd like to have as much healing effectiveness as possible. For your second modifier as a suffix on these 2x2 idols, you'd like to have something that looks like this. Chance to shred armor on hit with fire skills. If you don't have chance to shred armor on hit with fire skills here, you'd like to have as much armor shred here, or maybe as much armor shred on your gloves. But if you are unlucky and you don't get armor shred on your gloves, you really like to have all of this armor shred as possible. My amulet, believe it or not, is like the best thing that I could muster up. I only have tier 3 armor shred. I only have tier 4 spell critical strike chance. I'd like to have much more than that, but this is what I was able to farm, unfortunately. So making up for the only tier 3 armor shred, we have a little bit of armor shred on our idols too, which is just exactly what you're looking for. I think that about does it for the idols here. We're a fire damage build. We get more damage, more armor. Throne of Ambition's a good item. You should be using this. If you don't want to use it, whatever. For our blessings, we can talk a little bit about this. I like to use this view instead. Our blessings, we have coming on the right side here, and then these two across the top are the only ones that matter. So for Black Sun, we have crit multi. My character is sitting at about 76% critical strike chance. If you wanted to cap your crit and have less crit multi, you could instead go for the critical strike chance blessing. Pretty sure the numbers work out, the crit multi is better, but you can choose whichever one you like, either crit chance or crit multi. For End of the Storm, we're going for lightning resistance to cap our res. For Reign of Dragons, it's kind of cute. You don't need to go crit avoid because we're going for fortify, like the fiery dragon boots we talked about previously. But Reign of Dragons, you could go for bleed, which is hilarious because I actually only have 7 negative ailments unless I'm fighting against a necrotic monster, because against necrotic monsters I fear them, which is totally adorable. So you actually need one more damaging or so one more ailment to apply to the enemy to make perfect use of this, because we're only applying 7, not 8. So you could go for bleed, which is kind of a meme. More realistically, you're going for like poison res or plus to all resistances, maybe crit avoidance if you're going the crit avoidance route instead. For our Spirits of Fire, we want Fire Shred somewhere, and this is the best place for us to get it, just to take this one. And then for Age of Winter, you're going for one of two things. If you're playing the build like I am, with a Hand of Judgment, you're going to look for % increased armor. If you are playing instead with Frostbite Shackles, you would probably consider not taking the armor here and instead going for more ward generation. I think the armor is still good. We don't really have that much % increased armor. If you wanted to retool your mastery and get like some % increased armor from this, or maybe stack a bit more strength and get % increased armor, you could do that. But one of the benefits of having more armor is that more and increased are separate, so they really only shrines as a more multiplier to your armor if you also have a bunch of if you also have a bunch of increased armor somewhere. And of course, this all works with the 700 flat armor from your body that you should be using on your character. So that's a lot of talking. There's a lot of cool things to talk about here. I skipped over this one, didn't I? The Ashes of Orkirion. Let's talk about Ashes of Orkirion real quick. I mentioned previously that Soulfire has very low LP level, and it's very realistic to get this kind of thing with 2 or 3 LP, and it's got lots of relevant text on it. This item, why is it in my inventory? You technically could use a 3 LP Ashes of Orkirion. To me, that sounds like an absolute nightmare when it comes to farming. I do not ever want to recommend an item that's a nightmare to farm. Like, Scales of Eterra is cute. Do not worry about not having a Scales of Eterra with double cast speed on it. Ashes of Orkirion's cute because it gives some extra crit, and we need some extra crit. It gives damage. We like damage. It gives cast speed, and cast speed is one of those things that scales offense and defense. It gives all resistance and all res, even skills that cold res in case you're using Frostbite Shackles, and it gives Attunement as a prefix, or as the implicit modifier. It doesn't have a more multiplier from Soulfire, and it doesn't have the percent increased armor, but it does have cast speed, and cast speed's a hell of a drug. So if you wanted to pursue a 2 or 3 LP one of these, I wouldn't blame you. I think Soulfire is much better in terms of farmability, because you can get a 3 LP one of these without losing your flipping mind. So this is my recommendation, but this thing, yes, it does technically help you here. Other things that I forgot to call out during the gearing conversation, I said that we needed one more source of chill or one more negative ailment in the build. And technically, the Frozen Eyes of Formosus is a cast speed amulet, and it has flat damage on it, which is cute, and it has chance to chill on hit. This is absolutely adorable. If you have like a 3 LP one of these things or something, you could go double prefix modifier plus armor shred as a suffix. That could be the kind of route that you go in order to get chill and in order to have an even fancier build than I have. Completely adorable, because we don't actually have chill on the wand here. The very last thing to mention, I realize that I haven't talked about this item yet, is the Calamity Helmet. Remember, the Calamity Helmet, it now works with Healing Hands because it has the fire tag. So it has that 10 fire spell cast speed, and giving up the flat armor from like either Peak of the Mountain or a Prismatic Gaze is not nearly as big a deal as giving up the 700 flat armor that you would get if you tried to do a similar cute thing with the fire spell cast speed on your chest piece instead. This thing also has a little bit of percent increased damage, up to 80. It's really pretty easy to get this thing with LP because it has a very low LP level. So that's another option for you when it comes to gearing up this character here. I think that about covers it. This character has been one of the smoothest, most buttery, I said smooth already, buttery good. It's been the most buttery good, oh my goodness. It's been a very, very smooth experience, and I've genuinely enjoyed the shit out of it. Having those cute interactions like Divine Bolt literally doesn't work unless you have the Healing Hands affix, or why is Scales of Eterra in this build, or how are you generating so much ward, and talking about how busted this note is down here, or even just like the smaller questions like why am I using Lunge if I have Javelin spec'd in my 5 specialized skills. All of those questions make me feel like my brain is nice and big, when realistically this is just a build that we found on YouTube, and it captured my heart after watching it for half of 1 second, because it's the most beautiful build I've ever seen in all of Last Epoch. So if you think that your build is more beautiful than this, you're wrong. But I would like to know what your opinion is. So if you think that you've got another build that's totally beautiful, I would love to hear what it is. If you're playing this build in a different way, if you're making any of these other gearing options and your build is feeling good or not feeling good, I'd love to hear what your experiences are as well. We're probably going to pivot off this character in the next day or so because I have the urge to reroll and do those level 100 monoliths again, because for some reason I just can't get enough of that. So thanks for being here. I appreciate you listening all the way to the very end, and I will see you next time.